with black people who were coming to the United States by the thousands from 1619 through 1917. At that particular point, now my Apple Pencil isn't working. Oh, well, what can we do with that? We'll have to continue to use the finger. By 1917, there were 3 million. Why is it? Maybe this has something to do with it. Back to you. There were 3 million Jews in this country, as opposed to over 10 million people of color. Now, where did the Jews come from? Here's the key point on that. They came from Russia. And the Tsar, Nicholas. Tsar Nicholas had a policy of dealing with the Jews. It was called 1/3. I don't know. Now it's not working. Even Apple goes wrong. If you download page 38, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Tsar Nicholas had a policy of 1/3 starvation, 1/3 immigration, and 1/3 conversion. Simply meant we would starve 1/3 of the Jews in Russia. We would convert 1/3 of them out of their religion to Christianity, and 1/3 we would force out of the country, and they would emigrate elsewhere. You know, the idea of buses, put them on a bus and send them to the vice president or President Biden. The idea in history that times change, but things remain the same. What they're doing to the Mexicans right now was done to the Jews. And out of Russia came 3 million people between that policy in 1881 through 1917. Why did it stop? Well, white America had enough of the immigrants. They didn't get fed up with busloads. There weren't buses to do it then. They got fed up with the ships. And they passed the Johnson Act in 1923. Let's see if I can give you that one on the screen. Strange. My Apple Pencil is biased. Look at that. No, it doesn't work. Well, we'll forget about it. It's too annoying to everybody. The Johnson Act of 1923 was passed by Congress, cutting off the flow of immigrants to this country. Exactly what they want to do today. Be that as it may, 3 million Jews did come into the United States at that particular point. And lo and behold, they met up with people of color. People of color who were formerly known as slaves. Now, that brings us to the history of slavery. and why people of color were brought to the 13 colonies to begin with. In economics, there are two classes. There's the capitalist class, the controlling class with money, with power, with discipline. And there's the people that have to carry out the work. Now, in the year 2022, the major industry in this country at this particular point is IT and tech. Who do you get to work in tech? Anybody? You get people that are educated in tech, that have gone through the courses, that for the most part have gone through the schooling, and they become your workforce. In the 1600s, there was no tech. What was the economy based on through the Middle Ages at that point? It was based on tobacco, rice. And in order to get tobacco and rice converted into dollars or other forms of currency, you had to get people that were best known as slaves. And because of that need in the economy, because of that desire of the upper classes, the white supremacists, the capitalists, the rich Black aristocracies throughout Africa, in order for them to maintain control of their little empires, they had to have slaves to do the field work. As a result, there are two types of slavery, two types of employment, so to speak. Today we have what? We have independent contractors like the Uber drivers that work for themselves, or we have regular employees that pay taxes and receive Social Security. In days of yore, so to speak, we had indentured servants, or chattel slaves. The indentured servants worked for 7 years. Chattel slaves worked for life. In 1619, the first 20 people of color that arrived were either indentured servants or chattel servants. We don't know for sure. My guess is that they were indentured servants and they only had to work for 7 years. Why do I say that? We didn't have a census in those days. But remember, the purpose of this course is to stimulate your brain to what? What's the purpose of this course?
To think.
One word.
Think.
Think.
To think. Now, I told you last week that the couple that came off the boat named their first child William Tucker. That was the first Black baby born in this country. Now, who was William Tucker? He was the plantation owner that Anthony and Isabella, see, this week I remembered her name. They went to work for William Tucker. Now, why would they name their firstborn baby after the landowner, the plantation owner, if they weren't on good terms? They would have called the baby Master's slave number one. But they named it William Tucker because they had a decent indentured servant relationship. Anyway, that's my theory, and I advise all of you to use the history that you learn to stimulate your brain into thinking. So, what have we learned so far this semester? Hopefully, you've learned this about Black-Jewish relations. The Jews came off the boat escaping from horrible lifestyles, but they came as free people. They didn't come in physical chains. They came in empty pockets, but they came as free people. People of color, on the other hand, came in chains. And when they got off the boat, their lives were encapsulated in a form of slavery that didn't allow them to learn to read the new language or to write the new language. It didn't allow them to marry. It didn't allow them to do anything but remain in one form of slavery, employment, or another. Doing cotton, doing tobacco, doing rice, they were not free. Now, what do you think about this? If history is supposed to think you to thinking, what do you think about this situation? Jose, Jews coming off the boat in poverty, but free, and blacks. Whoops, why do I use the word blacks? Nobody asked me, what's the difference between Negro, black, African American? Maybe we'll get to that later. The answer is there really isn't anything, except whoever is using the word is expressing their own particular bias and prejudice. The blacks that were born in North Carolina don't want to be associated with the blacks that were born in the West Indies. Don't call me African American if I was born in New York City. I'm an American, a person of color. Getting away from that, the thought is, what are the sources of your thoughts? I spent a lot of time on the syllabus, and in particular, telling you that the most important page for you to learn in this course is on page 4. So write that down, page 4, F-O-U-R. If you leave this course with nothing but an understanding of the 5 categories of thinking on page 4, you will be way ahead of most of your fellow citizens. Your thinking about this subject or anything else is based upon those 5 categories. And today I want to examine with you a category called law. You know what I mean by law? Everybody's a law-abiding citizen. Nobody's jumping the turnstiles in the subway. We're not hitting our women in this age of feminism. We're behaving ourselves. Why? We're law-abiding citizens. So let me take you back in time now. Close your eyes. It's not 2022. It's the 17th century. And there's laws on the books, laws that were carried over from England to this country. And I'm going to discuss 4 of them with you today, if not more, depending upon time. And I want you to see where the law, the holy law, so to speak, that our ancestors were abiding by, is the basis of the white supremacy and the victimization of the majority of our population in the United States today. And it's the root cause of crime, poverty, and the lack of education throughout this country. From the coal mines of Virginia, to the sewing machines at home, to the fields of produce in California. These are the laws that were responsible. I emphasize the word were. They're not supposed to be active today. But you tell me after I finish explaining to you what the Hugh Davis case was all about, and what John Punch was all about, and what John Kasich was all about. You tell me where we are in terms of our thinking in this country today. Hugh Davis was a white supremacist. Sorry, we don't have white supremacists in the 1600s. We have white plantation owners. Same thing in my thinking, but you know, whatever. These are just words, right? Mr. Hugh Davis was caught by someone in the community, maybe the church, maybe his wife, maybe his brother-in-law. He was caught sleeping with a Black woman. And lo and behold, he was brought to the local judge, and the judge says, "Oh, not supposed to do that. That's against the law." Off to the courtyards, without due process, by the way. And he was whipped in public because you're not allowed, according to the law, to have affection or sexual relationships with a white woman. The 1600s go by, the 1700s go by, the 1800s go by, and we're in 1960s. Here in this God-fearing country in Virginia, and the case of Loving versus Virginia reaches the Supreme Court. Anybody know what that case was all about?
Yeah, it was a white man and a Black woman got married. I forgot where they got married. They went to DC to get married, and then they came back to Virginia and they caught them.
That's right. Another crime was committed, even though they were warned that it's against the law. Miss Loving married a white man, and they were sentenced to jail. I think she served some time, or he served some time before the Supreme Court ruled against the case and Loving versus Virginia. In 1965, it became legal for people of mixed color, black or white, to love one another, to have affection, sexual relations, or even marry one another. So much for the Hugh Davis case in the 1600s, all the way up to the 1960s, until that law changed. And by the way, it may have changed on the books, but I don't know how many of us, if we wanted to travel through the South today or other parts of the Midwest, would get away with a black-white union, irrespective of what the law says. That's so embedded in human bias and hatred. The next case I'd like to discuss with you is a very popular one today, John Punch.
That's
1640 is the date, right down to one of his ancestors in 2022, whose name I'll hold off for a while. John Punch was a slave, an indentured slave. He was supposed to serve for 7 years. In Virginia, on a plantation, doing tobacco and tobacco. And he had had enough of this. So he ran away with 2 other indentured servants who were serving 7 years. The other 2 indentured servants were white guys. One was from Scotland, the other, I think, from England. And they ran away north. As north of Virginia would have been Maryland. And then their owner caught up with them and brought them before a judge in Maryland. And they were identified as being legally owned by the white plantation owner. And the 2 white people were sent back by the judge from Maryland to Virginia to serve out their 7 years plus a few more as punishment for running away. But John Punch was sent back as a chattel slave for life. This is the first instance where you can trace bias and prejudice against people of color because of the color of their skin in the United States as being lawful. You were black, you were guilty. And that was the law. So beware. John Punch had no choice. He was taken back, probably in chains, and he served out the rest of his time in Virginia and went on in history to be the father, ancestor of who? Does anybody know? When Barack Obama ran for the presidency, every white bigot in the world wanted to prove something against him. So there was all talk that he wasn't a citizen, blah, blah, blah. But if he could be identified as having black blood going all the way back in time, and then having a white ancestor, then he wouldn't be black enough to be president, according to Black society that was bigoted against partial color in the DNA, through the DNA. So John Punch is the example of bias and prejudice in the sentencing of people of color. The origins of the law of censoring people because of your color or getting off easier if you are white. What does that have to do with my theory that things remain the same, only the names change? Today, one of the big battles in New York City today, the laws of incarceration, the laws of bail. Why are the blacks biased against? Why are they disproportionately sentenced? Why is their bail higher? Trace it all back. It all comes because of the law. The miscegenation laws, the inherent bias of black versus white, goes back in time to the 1600s, to the Hugh Davis case. Just as the criminality and incarceration laws can be traced back to John Punch. Another law of interest is the John Kaser case. That was 1655. He was the first person of African descent in the 13 colonies to be declared a slave for life as a result of a civil lawsuit. See, John Punch was a question of running away. This was a civil lawsuit where John Kaser felt he had served out his time as an indentured servant, and he moved on to another job. But his owner, so to speak, tracked him down, brought him to court, a civil court, and the civil court ruled that he didn't have any rights, and he was brought back to serve out a life sentence as a slave. These three laws have in common some very contemporary aspects. And when we discuss Black-Jewish relations, it'll become apparent that there were great differences between the two immigrating groups. Are there any questions so far? If not, I want to conclude with one particular aspect of the law that always fascinated me, and has shown me how you could use the law to just about justify anything. I used in days of yore, I used to teach this course on Sundays in Harlem. There used to be a sign up on the wall: no eating in class, no children in class, no dogs in class. And I used to wonder about that law. I used to think to myself, I'm teaching women, for the most part, that have full-time jobs, single mothers, and are striving to get out of poverty and the burdens of motherhood by taking classes in the school so that they could get a license to teach or to get a job that required some accreditation. And you weren't going to allow them to eat in class? You weren't going to allow them to bring their babies on their laps? The answer was, that's the law. So if I wanted to keep my job, I was supposed to obey the law. And that's one of the reasons why I spent very little time in academia following their laws. And I spent most of my life in business. There, at least, if I followed the laws, it was for my own gain. This next law is a classic. Don't be frightened by the name. I'll explain it to you. Partus sequitur, sequitur, ventrum. Where did the law come from? You know, some religions believe that the law came down from heaven. Moses received the commandments from God. But white plantation owners, the white supremacists of the 16th and 17th centuries, relied on English common law. And ventrum sequitur meant patrilineal descent. Your descent, if you were born here, your line of inheritance is from your father's line. Now, you may think it doesn't matter, but those of you who have to go to divorce court or seek a separation order or file petitions in probate court to get your ancestors' estate settled, you have to prove a line. Where do you come from? Originally in Norman law, in English law, whoever your father was, that's who you were legally. That's where you were descended from. Not the mother, but the father. Now, what happened here in the early centuries is as follows. Mr. White supremacist was having a good time sexually with the black women. And over a period of time, children were born. According to English law, those children that were born were his. When Poppy died, the 40 acres or the 400 acres or the 4,000 acres of property, he had a right to inherit. That wasn't such a good idea for white supremacists. So they changed the law just like that. And from then on, the children that were born in the colonies were descended from Mama. And even though Mama was black, it was okay because the babies were property. And instead of having to inherit daddy's property, they were property that was worth money that could be sold. So the more the merrier. The more the merrier. Children of matrilineal descent instead of patrilineal descent, that's bait and switch, the original bait and switch. They no longer could inherit the property, but they could be sold for money. Get it? Those are the kinds of things that people of color had to put up with in the early days, the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s. And then what happened? Somebody by the name of Lincoln comes along and says they're free. They're free? They take their 40 acres and a mule and they're getting out of town and they're going to make their own fortune. And they leave the South. And who do they come up to meet? My grandfather. You know who my grandfather was? My grandfather was one of those little people that came off one of those boats between 1881 and 1920s. Not knowing a word of English, not having more than a few pennies in his pocket, but free. And he was the kind of Jew that met the black that was suddenly free to leave slavery and didn't have to put up with all this crap that I just discussed with you that went on for 300 years here. That Jew and that freed slave began Black-Jewish relations. And at first, they had a pretty good relationship, very simply because the white aristocracy that owned the stores and the banks weren't that interested in extending credit or having to do with newly freed people of color. But my grandfather, who didn't know where his next meal was coming from, if he was a peddler, he wasn't, he happened to be something else. His cousin or his other relatives were peddlers. They would compete with white aristocracy and they would give credit to black people because other whites wouldn't. So the Jews became friendly with their customers and a relationship built up. That relationship built up over the years. And like most relationships, yours and mine and everybody else in this room, it has its highlights and its downlights. And there were some great times and there were some bad times. And we're going to trace during the course of your research and your papers some of the good times, and we'll also trace some of the bad times. The first example that I can give you of some of the good times was with the founding in 1909 to 1911. There was an organization called the NAACP. How many of you know? My pencil is working again. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's still to this very day the largest and most benevolent of all organizations for people of color. If you look back at the original Board of Trustees, I think 4 of the 9 trustees were Jewish. There were the Spingarn brothers that I recall. Anyway, that's the beginning of Black-Jewish relations. That's how it all started. Originally off the slaver boats and originally off the boats running away from Russia. People that were poverty-stricken but free, people that were enslaved but not allowed to become free. They met. And we're going to see what happened in subsequent years, how they interacted with one another. It's a young relationship. It really only started 100, 125 years ago. I can't tell you where it's going to go, other than it's likely to go where everything else in history has gone. And now I'm going to take a 2-minute break, and I'll turn the class over to questions. Questions about today's lecture, questions about the term paper, questions about anything else that's on your mind. I'll see you soon. So here we are. I'm here for you now. The questions, please.
Professor.
Yes, who's that? Please?
Um,
Liana,
Yeah, this is Leanna.
what can I help you with?
I was curious to hear more about a comment you made when you said that the medical field is very hard to get into. Most people would think that since there needs the medical field needs a lot of help, that they would accept applicants from a variety of programs, but you said it's the opposite, that many people don't get in. I was wondering if you could expand on that, if you remember what you said.
Well, the medical field is very difficult to get into because each school has a limit that it is legally entitled to accept in order to be accredited. That's how the economics and the laws work. In other words, if you are a medical school and you want to have the accreditation of the accrediting organizations that give you prestige and legal authority to treat people, you have to comply with those limitations.
Okay.
When Touro opened its osteopathic school in Harlem, it exceeded its limitation by one student and paid a very severe penalty for that. So yes, I stand by my statement. If you're allowed to take in 200 students, let's say the Touro's Medical School in Westchester, New York Medical College, very prominent, respected school in the United States. If it has a limit of 200 students, and we had 10,000 applications last year, those applications, except for 200 select students, would be rejected. And they would have to be applied elsewhere if they wanted to continue to pursue a place. So, Liana, I don't have a lot of words for you on that position, except to say that it's very difficult to become accepted as a medical student in the United States.
Okay.
And was your question a deeper one, that why is it so?
Yeah.
Beyond that the answer is that you lose your accreditation? Well, it's so, firstly, because of economics. The money is involved. And secondly, quality is involved. You can't dilute the quality of care and instruction if you have double the amount of students applying for it. It's not practical. So there are underlying reasons for why it's so difficult.
Okay, I understand it better now. Thank you.
And that's the reason why you have offshore medical students, medical schools. People can't get in here in this country. They go offshore if they're really determined. But those are the numbers, and they're not getting any easier. That applies to dentistry as well. I was instrumental in developing accreditation for Touro to open a dental school. I don't want to relive those years. It was torturous. And there were only, I think, 3 or 4 dental schools in the entire state of New York at that time. There was a crying need for it. Didn't mean anything. If it wasn't NYU or Columbia or one of the upstate CUNY schools, you couldn't be a dentist, not in this state.
Would you know the thing that makes an applicant really stand out to the people that are reviewing applicants?
That's another very sensitive subject. It's completely dictated by politics, economics, state relationships. You've got to take in a certain amount of males, certain amount of females, certain amount of people from out of state, certain amount of people within your state, certain amount of people that are second, third, fourth generation of people that went there. There's an entire host of pressures on the admissions committee to balance out how many people of color, dark skin, light dark skin. I mean, it's very complicated.
The way you're making it sound is it has nothing to do with the applicant, but more or less the politics of, what they have to keep up with.
No, no, that's not what I'm saying. The applicant, to begin with, has to be qualified.
Yeah.
They've got to pass a certain standard, otherwise they're not looked at. You've got to have an excellent MCAT score. And then you got to enter the pool that's so difficult afterwards. But if you don't have the MCAT score to begin with, forget about it. It's like saying to be alive is not a requirement, that's assumed. So don't go there if you don't have the basic qualifications, unless you're a masochist.
Okay.
And for the most part, in the olden days, if donations were made and so forth, people have a legacy in their family, they could get in, even if they didn't have the top schools. It's not so necessarily today. Most of the schools are endowed, they want to keep their reputation up, so I advise any of you that want to go. Yeah, I think Arturo, the PA program is a terrific program. I'm having lunch with a student from my class 10 years ago. By the way, Tracy, did you send her the link?
Yes.
The PA program at Thoreau was enormously difficult. There was one student that came to my class 10 years ago, charming, bright. The problem was she was from India and didn't speak English. And she came from City College, and because they were made fun of her in City, the students there weren't very hospitable. So somebody recommended her to Thoreau. I took a liking to her and I coached her. I said, "You'll be okay at Thoreau. You have to take lessons, etc." Let me turn my phone off. Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
No, please don't. You're on my Zoom link somehow. I don't know how. So please hang up. Please hang up. Did you hang up? I hope so. Okay. Getting back to that student, she wanted very much to become a PA. And as the years went by, she became very prolific in English and science, and she did very, very well. And even I couldn't get her into the PA program. They only have 25 chairs, that's all. And I don't know, hundreds of applications. So she went into nursing, and she's now a full-time nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital. And very, very happy. But I have to tell you, she went through hell for years pursuing that career, not knowing if she could get in and accepted, and the letdowns after she passed exams. You've got to really be dedicated to it. I encourage you to do it.
Yeah, I'm motivated enough. I'm still gonna go through with it.
And my sister-in-law is very persistent, calling to wish me a happy new year. So, Liana, I wish I could tell you it's going to be easier. It won't, but it will be rewarding. And there's no doubt in my mind that you have the qualifications for it.
Thank you, Professor.
I'm going to submit your bio to the admissions committee when you're ready to send the application in. And I'm going to stand behind it, and I'm going to tell them they're fools if they don't take you in.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a pretty good track record, so we'll see what happens. But yes, I stand behind what I said. It's very, very difficult. Okay, any further questions, please?
I had a question in terms of the term paper. Maybe I missed it, but
It can't be that bad a situation that you're holding your head.
oh no,
What does
it's
the term
not.
paper do?
It's not.
What about the term paper?
I just wanted to know in terms of, is there a requirement for the amount of like sources that you want us to use, or a specific type of
No,
citation or anything like that?
I don't mean to cut you short, but I've heard that question before.
Yeah.
And my answer is very simply, it depends on the topic as to the depth of your research and sources. What's your topic, Mason?
It's NAACP and
Okay.
and how the Jews essentially helped
Right.
NAACP. Sorry.
There's a lot of material on that, but it's not controversial and it's open. You should be able to do that with pleasure. You won't have to run around town to find other sources. You could do it from home.
Did you have a like a preference for citing? Can we use MLA or does it matter for you?
No, I don't care. All I want it to be is typewritten. So, does everybody here today have a topic? Are we all picked out? Tracy, what do we have? We have 14. So we have 14 topics, yes?
No, there's room 12 because 14 is up. You and I make 14.
Good.
Professor, I don't think I picked a topic.
Would you like to do one now? Do you know?
Sure. What's available?
I can't tell you what's
Esther.
available. What's of interest to you?
Tracy, you were gonna say something?
I was sending you a chat.
Oh,
Okay, let me say this.
let me see.
To take the topic by what's available is a big mistake. You can't take the topic on the basis of what you like. What's going on with the board? Somebody is. Okay. Esther, don't take what's available, take what you love. If you don't love the topic, it's not going to come out right. And don't rush. Tracy, I'm giving her another week special. Esther, call Tracy, text her, email her back and forth and pick a topic. Tracy will get to me over the holidays. And we'll get it approved. Besides, I don't want you working on it during the holidays.
I'm
In
sorry.
fact, are there any other questions?
Patty is speaking.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Professor. When is it due, the term paper? I mean, the research paper, sorry.
You've got to look at on in the syllabus.
Oh, it is.
The term paper is due, according to the syllabus, December 1st.
Okay, thank you.
You know, we put a lot of time into preparing these things. It would make your life easier if you just took a little time, thumb through the the notes that, there's hundreds and hundreds of pages Tracy and I prepared. Number one, to save you money so you don't have to buy a textbook. Secondly, so that you can read about this subject and not read the wrong stuff, which is mostly what's out there. And also the first couple of pages to tell you what's supposed to happen each week. So make life easy and don't ignore it. Look at those pages. And with that blessing, I want to wish all of you who are observant and Jewish a very happy and a healthy new year. And those of you who aren't observant and aren't Jewish, I want to wish you a very happy and a healthy year. And we'll see you a week from Wednesday. Take care all.
Thank you, Professor. Bye.
Have a good holiday, Professor.